dann willkommen zurück. Mittagessen war hoffentlich gut. Sehr gut zu hören. Der Nachtisch auch?
Ja,
gut.
Bayerisch Creme bloß genossen, aber die war lecker.
Ah, ich hatte diesen Kirschkuchen, der war auch gut.
Vielleicht ist nachher noch einer da.
Glaube ich nicht, weil da wird schon so das Abendessen dann aufgebaut. Gut, ich übergebe dann das Wort dem Kollegen von Tenable. Er wird kurz ein paar Metriken vorstellen. Vortrag ist wieder in Englisch. Would you like the question at the end or in the midterm?
At the end, if you don't.
Okay, then.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Whenever I speak in German, or in Germany, I should say, I always start off with an apology. So I apologise for the English education system deeming it a good idea to teach me pidgin French instead of business German. So hence why I'm speaking in English. After I spoke to ITQ, I now have to have a second apology, which is not a good start. My second apology is I literally know nothing about sailing. Okay? So they sent me the title through and they said, Gavin, we want to talk about security metrics, because it's one of my favourite topics, and I want you to relate it to sailing. Great. Do some research. We have this thing called the internet now, Google. It's excellent. You can type things in. It tells you interesting facts. Unfortunately, it doesn't tell you any facts on metrics for sailing. So I did find out some interesting things though. So this is the Oracle boat that they sell very, very quickly. And whenever they take the boat out, they have 300 sensors on the boat itself. They collect 200 megs of data from these small sensors. And they collect about 200 gigs worth of high-def video for each run. And what I found very interesting about this is why they do that. And they do that because they're literally on the edge of performance when it comes to the boat going through the water. This is actually high tensile metal with graphite in it and other things that I don't understand. Yeah, they want to make sure that the boat performs just 99.99% right on that limit, because at 100% the sail breaks and injury occurs. But let's put that behind us, because I know literally nothing about sailing. Instead, let's talk about cybersecurity, something I do know quite a bit about, thankfully. And I just want to start off with a statement. You know, we now live in a time when nation states can be attacked without a single bullet fired or a rocket launched. You know, we are now in this time where physical damage can be caused by some greasy hacker in a basement somewhere in another part of the world firing packets across the internet. Stuxnet is an excellent example of this. So who here has heard of Stuxnet? Great. Lots of you, so I won't bore you with it. There was actually another really interesting one just recently in Germany. Who here heard about the steel mill in Germany that was attacked and physical damage was caused to the furnaces? Yeah, less hands, and I'm not surprised because it actually happened at the same time as the Sony hack. So you know, the media were really concentrated on the Sony hack and they ignored this very, very bad hack in Germany affecting the physical world. And you know, a lot of people are spending a lot of money on security. Okay, a lot of organisations are spending significant amounts of money. JP Morgan, as an example, spend between $250 and $300 million a year on security. One could argue they should have spent an extra few dollars because they did get breached recently, but they do spend a lot of money. And what's interesting though is, you know, all these companies are spending lots and lots of money, yet breaches are still occurring. Okay, we're still seeing these breaches occur. In fact, we're seeing them occur with increased frequency. It's not just because the media is interested in talking about cybersecurity now. It's because they're happening a lot more frequently. And why are they happening with a lot more frequency? You look at Anthem as a breach that occurred last week in the US. Roughly 60 to 80 million social security numbers lost, which is a big deal to an American. You know, why are these things happening? Well, unfortunately for hackers, the data they steal is going down in value all the time. A few years ago, when I could still make hairstyle choices, the average cost of a credit card on the black market was around about $100. It's now around about $1 to $2. Okay, depending on the validity of the credit card details. So they need to steal lots and lots more data to be able to get the dollars that they want. So, quick anatomy of a breach. I did this because I could do a cool graphic. So, once the foothold has been gained via phishing or generally a vulnerability, there's actually a really good quote just last week on Twitter by a guy called the Grug, and he said, "Give a man an O-day, he'll have access for a day. Teach a man to fish, and he'll have access for life," which is very true. Unfortunately, quite often the footholds are being established by phishing or by these remote code execution vulnerabilities. Shell shock is actually a very good example of that remote code execution vulnerability that's easy to take advantage of. So once they've established their foothold, they explore. They go and find what's actually on the network, what's interesting. So the stuff that happens before this foothold has been gained. By the way, so my background, I was an ethical hacker. I used to break into stuff for fun and profit. And so you'd actually do quite a lot of things before the foothold was gained. But once you're in there, you explore, you establish by injecting code for permanence. You want to be in there easily and actually have a connection into the network. I was talking to the CISO of Tesco, a little bit like Audi over here, Tesco over in the UK, yesterday. And he said that he found a system in his Thailand office that had been there for 2 years, and nobody knew where it came from. So a group of hackers had actually installed a system on their network, and it had been there for 2 whole years. And once they've established, they want to evade, they want to get rid of all their lovely footprints that they're leaving in your system logs and things like that. They then exfiltrate, they steal all of this valuable data, and then they sell it for profit. Lots and lots of profit, by the way. They make a lot of money by doing this. And a lot of organisations are still failing to do basic security well. One of my taglines that I quite often use is that the biggest issue in security today is not APT, it's apathy. Okay? Now, I didn't use it over here because apathy is a bit of a weird English word, but basically there's a big problem where a lot of people are struggling with security and the interest is still quite low. And so I think of 4 simple questions that organisations should be asking themselves. Okay, so question 1. What critical assets, data and vulnerabilities do I have on my infrastructure? That is an incredibly difficult question to answer, by the way. I'm not playing this down. It's very, very hard. Again, I was talking to the CISO of Tesco yesterday, and after the discussion, it was quite interesting. He told me a load of things about how Tesco work, and I probably should have told you it was Tesco. And he said to me, we stock take tins of beans, and as well as other produce. And so I can tell you to the single number of how many cans of beans we have in every store across the whole country. Can of beans, 50 cents. I can't tell you how many servers we have on our infrastructure. Do you think that's a really weird position to be in? Right? So the second question, what controls should be implemented to protect all these assets and data? And I'm talking about controls, I'm not talking about technology, I'm not talking about going and spending $1 squillion with a vendor. I'm talking about take a step back and look at the controls that need to be implemented to protect the data. Because, by the way, if you don't answer this question right, then you could be paying $1 to protect the dime or paying €1 to protect a cent. So you need to understand what data is there first before you start to implement controls. And then after that, how can I add value to the overarching business goals? This is something that as security people, we quite often forgot 10, 15 years ago. The sky was always falling. It was the next big vulnerability, or it was people could break into these infrastructures. But the reason why we didn't get the buy-in from the business that we wanted was because we weren't attaching security to the overarching business goals. Okay? So I've been speaking for quite a while, and I can remember 5, 6, 7 years ago, whenever it went to Q&A, the first question I always got asked, pretty much every time, was, how can I get budget for security? Yeah. And it's like, you look at it in the wrong way. It's not budget for security, it's budget for the business to be successful. And you know, be able to attach those, the controls to the business goals. And then how do I measure the effectiveness of the controls that I put in place and identify when they fail? And this, unfortunately, is something that a lot of people forget. They spend $1 million with a security vendor, they get the nice new shiny box, blue LEDs, has to be blue LEDs. Probably one of the other worst things that's happened to security. Blue LEDs, and they put it in, and then they forget about it. Target is an excellent example of this. Who here has read the kill chain analysis of the target breach? Okay, homework for you. Read it, it's really interesting, right? And the reason why the kill chain analysis of the target breach is so interesting is because they'd spent a lot of money on a lot of things, okay? And Home Depot had as well. And the reason why they got breached is because they weren't listening to the controls that were there. So FireEye was in Target, doing an awesome job of seeing all these bits of code going across the wire. Thousands of alerts were generated, but nobody actually listened to them. So in their EPOS environment, their point of sale environment, the hackers installed some code, black POS, and FireEye saw it, alerts, no one listened to them. And then they upgraded the malware to be able to capture more data, and they still didn't get caught. Okay? So when you have a good control, you need to measure the effectiveness of it to be able to operationalize it fully. Okay? And this is really what I'm going to talk more about today. So one of my favourite topics, effectiveness metrics. My girlfriend loves me talking about effectiveness metrics. It's jolly interesting. Okay, so quite often when I talk to organisations, I say to them, how do you measure how good you are at security? And I get a multitude of answers. In fact, actually, I did a survey last year using Vance and Bourne into Germany and into the UK, and I asked these types of questions. And the most popular measure of the success of security was this one. We count all the malware caught. Okay? It's a terrible metric. I could spend an hour ripping this metric to pieces. It's a very, very bad metric. So let's say you catch 5 pieces of malware today. Good job. Tomorrow you catch 8. Is that good? Is it bad? There's no context to it. Yeah, and by the way, you caught 8, but how much of your infrastructure is actually being protected by that control? So a far better metric than this one is how much of my infrastructure has got up-to-date antivirus deployed across and working. Another one is we count all the vulnerabilities. So Tenable is a vulnerability management company, and I speak to a lot of organisations that scan for vulnerabilities, and they say, oh, we've got 10,050 vulnerabilities in our infrastructure. I don't care. Doesn't tell me anything. Right? Because if you've got 10,000 vulnerabilities, how important are those vulnerabilities? What's the criticality of those vulnerabilities? How much of your infrastructure have you actually scanned? Because you could have one incredibly bad machine that's got 10,000 vulnerabilities, and you've not scanned the 3,000 other devices within your infrastructure. Oh, I knew I pressed that wrong button. So there's best practice. I don't like to reinvent things. There's people far smarter than me that come up with these metrics. And I look at the SANS top 4 controls. I sometimes quiz people. Generally, if I have salespeople in the room, I quiz them on the top 4 controls. They always fail miserably. So what are the top 4 controls? Asset discovery. Yeah, that's really exciting, but it's critical. Okay. Identify all assets within the infrastructure. Second one is what software do we have deployed? In fact, going back to the conversation I had with the CISO, he did a huge project on identifying all of the assets within his infrastructure. Imagine going to the board of directors and saying, could I have $1 million to find out what assets we've got within the infrastructure? And they've already fallen asleep. Okay, it's not exactly the most exciting thing. And so what he actually did, he turned it around and he said, can I have $1 million to go and discover all of the assets and how old they are so we can get tax relief on those systems that are getting older and older. So in the UK, I don't know if it's the same in Germany, for every year the machine is ages, you can get some tax relief on that, depreciation of assets. What's the configurational state? So how well is that system configured against security best practices? And then finally, vulnerabilities. Okay? So these are the top 4 controls. And I wanted to put these up here just to frame some of the metrics that I'll be talking about. Okay? So yeah, if you're going to start somewhere, the SANS top 20 critical security controls is a very good place to start. By the way, these top 4 are the most critical ones of the critical security controls. So you should do these ones first. How well do people do these? Terribly. Okay? Who here would dare to put their hand up and say they know exactly every single asset within their infrastructure? Good man, if you've got one system. No, I'm joking. Good. Maybe you're one of our customers. So, yeah, it's very, very difficult to accurately identify this. And in fact, actually, if you read the SANS critical control number 1, it says both active, as in going and scanning the network, and passive, as in listening to the network, methods need to be deployed, because quite often people scan their infrastructure every month, or every quarter, or sometimes half yearly or even yearly. That's ridiculous. You think about how quickly systems get introduced into a network. Virtualization allows you to clone and press play and spin up a new machine within seconds. Okay? So let's talk about some of these metrics. So, excuse me. First off, patch rate. I love patch rate. Patch rate is by far one of the best measures you can use to understand how effective your controls are. I've identified a vulnerability, let's say some of the millions of vulnerabilities that we discover on Flash or at Microsoft towards the end of the year, or things like shell shock. I identify a vulnerability. How quickly do I deploy the patches to fix those vulnerabilities? I don't care that you have 10,000 vulnerabilities. I care about how quickly you fix them. And of course, you don't want to just say patch all of the things, because that is bad. Because that's actually going to cause a business impact just by patching everything. So you have to prioritise them as well. And I can bore you for a long time talking about CVSS, base and temporal metrics and things like that, but I won't bother because you've just had lunch. So patch rate is a very, very good one. By the way, what I really love to do with organisations is measure their patch rate, but then measure it per business unit. So I can say, right, how good are the Germans against the French, against the British? Yeah? And say, hey, the Germans are patching in, on average, 27 days. The English are doing it in 55. I'll fall on my sword and say that the English are terrible at patching. And what's really interesting when you start to measure things in that way is that the British guys suddenly go, well, that's not good. The Germans are beating us. How can we beat them? And they'll improve their process. You'll see this iterative improvement on the process because they're measuring each other against, each other. Your peer competition is by far one of the easiest ways to improve a control and cause fires. Next one, adherence to corporate security policy. Quite often I go into infrastructures and I ask, have you got a defined security best practice? And every time I go to a bank, as an example, they will say, oh yes, we've invented our own. Cool, then I have a look. It's CIS, right? Doesn't matter, I don't care. The fact that you actually got one, which is a good thing. But how often do you actually check your infrastructure to validate how closely your systems are adhering to those best practices? No one does ever, okay? And so that's a really good measure as well. So 90% of your infrastructure of your security policy as an example. What is my scan coverage? Okay, this is going back to that 10,000 vulnerabilities. You know, I've got 10,000 vulnerabilities. How much of your infrastructure have you actually scanned? Okay, you know, how many systems have you identified and then assessed to understand where vulnerabilities are and where weak configurations are? It's going to be difficult to get to 100%. Of course it is. But if you don't measure it in the first place, then you're never going to know. Okay? And I quite like to break that down as well. So you can either break it down by asset importance, and you can also break it down on how in-depth do you want to scan. So you could say you have a goal of 100% of assets should be scanned using credentials that are critical to the business. Okay? And then identification of hosts as well. My favourite question I ask audiences is always, how quickly would you identify someone like me on your network? And the average answer is, anybody hazard a guess? Never. Okay? Because the inability to identify new hosts being attached to the network. In the Black Friday sales over in the US, you could buy an Android tablet for $40. Computing power of the desktop from 3 or 4 years ago, configured like crap, loads of vulnerabilities in it, and it had things like allow code to be installed from any store, not just the Google Play Store and all that type of stuff. You think about people, $40, they buy this tablet, what do? They go to work. They walk in, they put the Wi-Fi password in, and now your asset list is increased by 1, you'll never see it, and it will be an easy foothold for an attacker to use to break into the network. In fact, you're starting to see Android viruses that are opening up proxies so you can connect through the Android device onto networks because of that type of behavior. And it comes down to a simple thing. If you can't measure it, or IT, see what I did there? Right. If you can't measure it, you can't control it. If you don't measure something, you can never improve it. If you don't know how good you are right now, how can you have an aspirational goal of where you want to be? So it's really important that if you measure something, it doesn't matter how bad you are right now, you're in a better position than the person that doesn't measure. Because you can accurately say, I know that I'm only 3% scan coverage and I want to get to 100%. Okay? Or I know my patch rate is 6 months, but at least I know it's 6 months. You have no idea. Okay. Oh, I know I pressed that again. So it's really important though and I suppose I should put a sales sheet on this one, but didn't really think about it. Give operations an achievable goal instead of an impossible mountain. And the reason I put this here is that I go and talk to organisations quite a bit, and I went to quite a large investment bank and walked in, and I was there to talk about metrics again, always metrics. And I said to the IT security guy, how do you measure your vulnerabilities? And he says, we count them. Okay. And operations was in the room. So I turned to operations and I said, how does that make you feel? He said, it makes us feel really bad. Because no matter how hard operations work, there's always a long list, a big number of vulnerabilities they have to fix. In fact, actually, it causes the wrong type of behaviour because IT operations don't want to give you visibility because they don't want to see the big number. They don't want to extend the amount of things they're scanning because it just increases their workload and the amount of things they have to fix. Whereas if you're measuring patch rate instead, then IT operations understand that they're doing a good or a bad job. And then they understand that no matter how many vulnerabilities you find, they've got a more simple measure. In fact, when it comes to metrics, I hope this is my next slide. Yes. When it comes to metrics, you should use the SMART filter. Okay? SMART filter should be applied to many things. It needs to be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. Okay? So whenever you look at metrics to use to measure the effectiveness and efficiency of your controls, just think of this. Okay? SMART. This one, attainable. So the CISO of Visa for Europe is now, I think they've renamed named into the head of cybersecurity defence or some weird title. But anyway, Matt Johnson, who is the CISO of Visa, happens to be a very, very good friend of mine. Just by total coincidence, big drinking buddy for years, he's now the CISO of Visa. Not saying that if you come drinking with me, you become a CISO, I'm just saying it's coincidence. And he used to use the Tenable piece of this as a stick for his IT ops and security team. And so if you've ever walked with a 4-year-old or a lady, you always say, they always say, how far is it? You say, oh, it's only 5 minutes away. And of course it's 15 minutes away. And then you're 3 minutes later, are we there yet? Yeah, don't worry, it's only 4 minutes away. Yeah, so you're kind of like changing the goal to modify their behaviour. And he did exactly the same with things like a patch rate. So he would change the level of what he was measuring for patch rate. So he would use the temporal metric of exploitability first. He would say, right, all exploitable vulnerabilities have to be patched within 30 days. That's my aspirational goal. As soon as they've got to that point, he then dialed it down and he said that are remotely executable, or whichever filter you want. Keep pressing that button. I'm not smart. So you also then need to prioritise assets and vulnerabilities by business relevance. Not all assets are the same, not all vulnerabilities are the same, something that people often forget. Okay, so a good example actually, quite recently in the media, a lot of people have been talking about vulnerabilities. Yeah, you look at Shell Shock, Heartbleed, basically a vulnerability that has a logo. Right? Doesn't mean that that vulnerability is bad for you. Okay, so prioritise what makes sense for you in a business context. I'll give you a good example. So Marks and Spencer's over in the UK, they're a big grocer. They also sell bras and pants and stuff. And they're a customer of ours, and I went to see them just before the Christmas freeze. So over in the UK we have asset freezes to make no changes. And this was the day that MS 1468 was discovered. I'm a vulnerability geek, I apologise. But it was basically a very, very, very bad vulnerability. So I said to Marks and Spencer's, are you going to fix it? No. Why? Because fixing it has got a bigger business impact than not fixing it. Okay, so because the vulnerability is really bad, but the business impact is more severe, they can prioritise the business impact and say, no, let's not fix that until January, when everybody's bought all their pants and food that they need for Christmas. And assets are exactly the same. My laptop is far less more important than the source code for our enterprise products. Okay, so if I'm seeing an attack on the source code servers for Tenable, that's bad. If someone's attacking my box, doesn't mean that. Yeah. Go for it. So we then we have to align those security issues with the business risk. So I've kind of talked about this already, but for me, one of the most interesting issues that I found when talking to security people is they really still stay in the bits and the bytes. Okay, they still talk about bits and bytes don't belong in the boardroom. Okay, CEOs and directors that don't really understand security stop trying to teach them security. They don't get it. It's fine. Change your language. Okay. And one of the most interesting things, I used to be involved in mergers and acquisitions for my previous employer. And we used to use metrics to measure how successful a business would be if we bought them. Okay, so a good example could be, what's the percentage of revenue spent on development? Okay, because if they spend 5%, their product's going to be rubbish. Yeah? If they spend 30%, it's going to be a lot better. Okay? And those type of KPIs and metrics really make sense to the business. In fact, quite often, has anyone heard of the line when they talk about reporting? Has anyone heard this phrase? Maybe it's not made out of Germany yet. Americans love this phrase. Okay? Oh my God, is that above the line reporting? Right? And what that actually means is, from your level upwards, how do you report on your security? Okay? And above the line reporting is all about in a business context and then represent that back to the business. So I'm quite fortunate. I spent quite a lot of time talking to CISOs, and they liked it. And quite often, after a couple of beers, they show me their dashboards, and they're all metrics, okay? And there are only a few. They have like 3 or 4 metrics, and that's it. If you have more metrics, then your message is lost. So you pick 2, 3, or 4. Patch rate's an awesome one. Put business context around it, however you want to do it. And then below the line, I want to be able to have effectiveness metrics to manage expectation downwards. I want to be able to say to people, this is where you are now, this is where I want you to get to. Okay, so you use the line, if you will, as a filter for what you show to the business or to the technical audience. Okay, this is a really old photo. I love it though. Yeah. For the people that have been asleep, it's pretty obvious that this is the most ineffective gate ever. Right? Metrics drive behaviour. Okay? Make sure the behaviour that you want is driven from the metrics that you create. Okay? So, quick bit about us. We invented Nessus. Who here has ever run a Nessus scan? I know you do. Cool. So we own Nessus. We invented Nessus. Renaud de Racing, 17-year-old, came up with Nessus back in 96, 97. Quite an impressive chap. He created the company along with Ron Gula, who created Dragon, IDS, and a few other people like Marcus Branham, who invented NFL firewalls. He actually installed the first ever public firewall. Firewall into a public infrastructure, which happens to be the White House. So we have technology to be able to continuously monitor the infrastructure to be able to tell you how effective your controls are. Whilst we're doing that, we also help identify the vulnerabilities. We're a scanner. We can go out into the infrastructure and tell you what bad things you have out there. Do you have shell shock? I had an email just this morning from a reporter asking me how popular shell shock was still. It's in the top 10. It's 4 months ago. Come on, guys. Reduce risk and ensure compliance. Okay, so things like the BSI or PCI or whatever. How do we do it? Well, we have vulnerability scanners. We can go into the infrastructure, scan all these devices. We can also grab information from logs. Okay, logs are really interesting. You can get a lot of good data on them. Can I give you an example? I'm going to give you an example. I've got a microphone. I'm just going to give you an example. So logs. For vulnerability management, why is that really cool? Well, DNS, DHCP, firewall, all these things see your devices. Okay, one of those systems is going to be touched by an asset connecting to the network. If I sucked all the logs, then I can identify the assets that I've not scanned. Okay, we can also do things like malware detection, compliance and patch auditing. One of the really interesting things is we do network behavioural analysis. So we can actually sit on a network. In fact, here is a network. Well, it's kind of a network. It's a marketing network. It's a marketecture. We can actually sit on the network and we can identify hosts real time. So if someone walks into your infrastructure and spins up that Android device that's configured incredibly badly, then we can actually sit on there and pick it up. Okay? Literally within a second. And we can tell the scanners, and we can tell Security Center, which is our enterprise product, by the way. I try not to talk about product too much. I don't think that's very useful. But we have Security Center sitting at the top, and PVS says, "Hey, somebody spent $40 and bought an Android tablet. Now it's on your network. What are you going to do about it?" And we can actually instruct Nessus to do stuff. We can instruct other systems to do stuff. We can modify network access control as an example. We also, with PVS, we can scan devices that you can never scan. Okay? We see this a lot in certain infrastructures. SCADA is a really good example. SCADA is difficult to scan. Vulnerabilities are found on SCADA devices every day. I don't know if any of you keep up with it, but Siemens, as an example, released patches for critical remote code execution vulnerabilities on some of their ICS devices only about a week ago. Yeah, that's bad. Yeah? These are big machines, right? That have these vulnerabilities. I don't want to scan them though, because they're doing important things like a nuclear power station, or building cars, or it's in an operating theatre or something like that. And the worst thing you can do is scan a device when they're doing important things. So we can sit on the network, we can identify the fact that that device is there and communicating, not that it should be, that it is communicating, and we can actually analyse the traffic and say, oh, by the way, I know it's vulnerable to that because of the things that we can grab from it. We also have a log correlation engine to grab all those cool, interesting logs as well as other stuff, which I won't bore you with now. And then we have the ability to do this in the cloud as well. Cloud, God, people love cloud. Cloud. Or the internet, as we called it a few years ago. So we have Nessus in the cloud to enable you to scan your external, but also to scan your internal network as well. We can also do ASV, certified scanning for PCI, to be able to get your certificate quite easy. So, it's me. Follow me on Twitter. I tweet quite frequently. And I tell people interesting things, sometimes not so interesting things. I never tell people what I've eaten. That's one of my golden rules for Twitter, so don't worry. You can email me, gmail@tenable.com. You can go to our website to get more information. We're actually downstairs near the front entrance, so come along and see me. I'll be around for the rest of the day, and I also heard rumours of beer and wine, so I will be here for that as well. If you want to ask me any questions, I believe I have 5 minutes. No questions, come on. Questions? No? Okay, can I tell you? I'll tell you a story instead. Stay. I'll tell you a story. I've got 5 minutes. So, I used to get involved in fixing stuff quite often when a breach occurred. The bat phone would go and figure out what the hell happened. And about 6 or 7 years ago, I got a strange phone call from a Nordic country. I won't say who because I'm under NDA. And they said, can you come over to Sweden? I did it. Okay. Can you go over to Sweden? Awesome, I was drinking with the customers at 1 a.m. I'm feeling rough. Went over to Sweden, and a certain bank there had been breached. They said, can you sign all these documents and never mention our name, which I never have. And they said, right, we've been breached. Okay, how did it happen? Turns out that an attacker had broken into the network, and then they'd replaced LS, command that every Unix admin always runs, or if you need like a cool backdrop for a hacker-filled LS, right? Hacked with LS. And the only way they discovered this was because a admin had finger fudged. Right? So he did, instead of LS minus L, he finger fudged with like LS minus LK or something. Boom! Load of really weird stuff. So he analysed it. Right? Did a string analysis of it, saw that it was bad stuff. Okay? And he went to the next machine. I wonder if this is bad as well. Oh dear. Next machine. Oh crap. And it turns out of their 1,000 systems, about 600 have been Trojaned with this simple Trojan. And when they went and did the analysis, it turns out that they've been Trojan for 6 months. Awesome. 6 months. Okay? And they had like some really effective, really expensive controls in there. One of them was an IDS IPS, which was managed by a third party. So the CISO, he rings up this company and says, I spend a significant amount of money with you every year. We've been hacked for 6 months. Why have you not told me? No word of a lie. The reseller said, the MSSP said, that's because you don't have the premium reporting package. Would you like it? Right? And it's a really good example of a failed control. Right? They spent a lot of money on this. By the way, he actually then paid for it, which was unbelievable. And it cost him millions of dollars, literally millions of dollars, and just on implementing new technology to figure out what the hell had happened and fix the issue. Millions of dollars because he had a control that wasn't effective, that he wasn't measuring appropriately, and that hadn't been fully operationalized. And with that, you're allowed to come on the stage now. Thank you.
Thanks. What a nice story about Spain, Sweden. Yes. Okay. Hier geht es jetzt um 14 Uhr weiter mit CyberArk. Im Stadtsaal geht es mit Palo Alto Traps weiter. Für die, die es schon kennen, das ist ein sehr interessantes Produkt, was neu auf den Markt gekommen ist. Und im kleinen Saal, also im Säulensaal, wie es so schön heißt, ist Logpoint mit HLSI, also die SAP-Absicherung von der IT-Cube. Vielen Dank.